Okay, let's go. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the first Well event of 2020. My name is Melinda Yee Franklin. I'm the Managing Director of Corporate and Government Affairs for United Airlines, and I'm also the Chair of the Board of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. This year's Well program might look different as we have gone virtual, but the mission has never been more important. The Well program is the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce's intentional initiative to represent all genders of all levels and across all industries. WELL stands for Women's Empowerment, Leadership, and Learning, so we can truly learn from each other as we spend an hour together today. WELL is for all allies of gender equality and workplace inclusion. Over the past 3 years, we have posted a number of events, large and small, to discuss topics that are important to women in the workplace. We have highlighted female thought leaders, offered resources on financial literacy, and created a community of like-minded supporters of empowering women in the workplace and beyond. As a female leader of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, I'm proud that the Chamber advocates for diversity and inclusion and allows us a space to support one another and to be heard. In fact, I was just on another webinar yesterday, and there was a focus on how we can all help each other. And part of that means being able to share information, being able to support each other, being able to be a resource for ideas, to bounce ideas off each other, and then to be a cheerleader for each other as we go through this journey together. We have to be real and practical and be able to give the scoop. If you hear something that may not sound like it's a good situation for someone, then you got to tell them. You got to be candid and transparent. And that's what we look at in terms of bringing our community of WELL leaders and influencers together. Now I want to remind our audience of a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you're interested in asking our speaker, Elizabeth, a question, please use the Q&A chat feature listed below. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible at the end of this program. I want to take a moment to thank our incredible sponsors of WELL. And first, our title sponsor, Accenture, and special shout out to Julie Rosendahl, who's been incredible. And really been a visionary for WELL and all that we stand for and all that we're doing. As well as Visa, PG&E, Comcast, Hanson and Bridget, BlackRock, Recology, the Golden State Warriors, Fisher Phillips, Redwood Credit Union, Hint, my favorite water, and today's partner organization, the San Francisco Department on the Status of Women. Now, I am so thrilled to introduce today's speaker, Elizabeth Newman. She's the Policy and Projects Director at the San Francisco Department on the Status of Women. Elizabeth develops policy, advocates for legislation, conducts research, and manages programs to address women's human rights, economic empowerment, and gender-based violence. Elizabeth conducts gender analysis of the city's workforce and operations to implement the groundbreaking San Francisco Women's Human Rights Ordinance, leads outreach to promote best practices for gender equality in the workplace, and collaborates with agencies, officials, and stakeholders to foster the equitable treatment and advancement of women and girls. Elizabeth previously worked as an advocate and organizer for workers' organizations, rights, and economic justice at the San Diego and Imperial Counties Labor Council, AFL-CIO, and coordinated field programs for candidate and issues campaigns. She is steeped in knowledge, and we're so proud to have her join us today. Take it away, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Melinda. And I really want to thank the Chamber of Commerce for this opportunity to present. I think that this is so critical to have these discussions at this time, and I appreciate their leadership in inviting me to speak about this. So I'll get started with the slides, and as Melinda said, please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation so that we can respond to them at the end. We'll have time for that. Okay, next slide. Thank you. I'm very excited to be with you all today to discuss issues of gender and racial equity in this moment, and specifically as they relate to the workplace. So we'll start there, and I'll discuss some strategies and resources to address them. And throughout the presentation, please think about what is being said, and feel free to share your own experiences. I'm certainly, as much as Melinda said, have a lot of experience, but I also love to learn from others on what is working on the ground in your own workplaces. What do you wish was being addressed differently, or what do you hope other workplaces could learn from your own experience? So we'll have time for that discussion at the end. Next slide. So here we are in the 6th month since the pandemic has reshaped our world, and we all know that work has changed. Businesses have closed, millions of people have been laid off or furloughed, and those of us lucky enough to still have jobs are experiencing a huge shift in the way we work. Where we're working, and many people are working from home, and if not, they might have plexiglass surrounding their workplace. They might have layers of personal protective equipment. Your job may have changed to respond to shifting needs, changes in customer demands, and what and how we work has changed. People have experienced reduced hours for cost-saving measures, or are working different hours to reduce the number of staff on site, split childcare coverage with a partner, or support their families. And who you are working with has definitely changed. You might be seeing more faces on Zoom, but you might also have more people around you as your whole family goes to work and school from the same house. And others are seeing less people. They're more isolated from who they would normally see in their daily life. So we not only have the pandemic, but we also have the economic crisis that's followed, and the ongoing work of acknowledging and dismantling the racism in our society, systems, and selves. What many people thought would be just a moment in time has become our new normal. And so we are at a place where we really must be adapting. And if workplaces have not already, it's critical that they continue to adapt to meet this current moment. And as much as we are all in this together, we also know that this moment is not impacting everyone equally. Next slide, please. The delicate juggling act of life that most of us had been doing came crashing down as we suddenly had to shelter in place. And it all fell on those who were already walking a tightrope. People of color, people with disabilities, working families, low-income families, immigrant communities, and for those who were already in a precarious position, things just got harder. Women have faced the largest share of job losses across the nation. So in this chart, women are on the left and men are on the right. And as you can see, the two longest bars are Black and Latinx women who about almost one in four, more than 1 in 5, have lost their jobs in California specifically. And that's compared to about half as many for Black and Latinx men. Only Asian and Pacific Islander men have faced a higher amount of job loss than women of the same race. Next slide, please. For the first time ever, we are in a recession where women are being the hardest hit. It's been called a she-cession, and it's more than just the job losses. There is also the fact that women, and predominantly women of color and immigrant women, make up many of the essential jobs like cashiers, cleaners, nurses, and caregivers that also put them at a higher risk of infection. And often these jobs have unspoken expectations of an ongoing availability to provide care and services for others, while failing to acknowledge the challenges these women and their families face. And they're also typically low paying. And when childcare and schools closed, women were stranded and carried the added burden of virtual learning, providing cooking, cleaning, and caregiving for others, as well as balancing their own professional work. This is also pushing many women to step back or step out of the workforce entirely. There was actually a study that showed Out of academics, women had a drop in research in the months following the shelter-in-place orders, while men actually produced more work. So there's a very real concern that a majority of the workforce gains that women and people of color have made in the last few decades will be lost. And so this is where we start from, acknowledging that this moment in time is incredibly challenging for all of us, but especially for women, people of color, and our other marginalized communities. The current crises have already exacerbated existing issues of race and gender inequities in the workplace. However, there are some things that employers and individuals can do to address them. Next slide, please. Okay, let's be honest. Work and life were never in balance for most of us, especially those with caregiving responsibilities and family responsibilities. Caregiver discrimination was already on the rise prior to the pandemic, and there are long-standing stereotypes of women and people of color being less committed to their jobs. These biases have prevented women of color especially to lose out on jobs, higher pay, and leadership opportunities. One study found that mothers were 79% less likely to be hired than an identical candidate without indications of children. For employers of color, or employees of color, and Black employees most often, they face biases that are they're being seen as unprofessional, and they have to work harder, so much so that many people of color downplay their racial identities, adjusting how they speak, look, and act to fit into a white workplace. A survey from just a year ago found that 58% of Black professionals experienced racial prejudice at work, and that was the highest of any racial or ethnic group. So our work and personal lives already didn't fit well together. With the current health, economic, and social crises, it is nearly impossible to meet the demands of our professional and personal lives. Add in the stress of reduced or lost wages, the violence against Black and brown people, and the protests to demand justice, and the loss and the fear of the coronavirus, and we're all pretty tapped out of our resilience. Our normal supports are gone. We are not seeing many people outside our household, and it feels a lot like we are on our own. And yet the current work from home scenarios mean that we are also inviting coworkers, clients, our bosses into our personal living spaces. So what was a safe private space has become open for comparison, as you have tiles of employees' spaces across your screen. And for employees who already didn't match the image of an ideal worker, windows into their personal lives can increase their vulnerability to biases and judgment. Next slide, please. So given some of these issues facing workers in this current environment, I want to share a few ideas about how to foster an inclusive workplace, even as the how, when, and where we work has been transformed. Flexibility was already one of the top ways employers could support families in normal times, and really all employees, but especially now with children and other families in our workspaces, employers who can help parents continue to succeed at work and at home during these chaotic times will benefit in the long term with better retention of top talent and a more positive, productive culture. And this could look like giving employees the leeway to get their work done when they can and letting go of traditional schedule expectations. This also means starting and ending meetings on time for those who are balancing more during the day, and respecting employees' boundaries while also setting and managing expectations. And when we look to the future and returning to the workplace, there also needs to be flexibility and understanding that employees, as they return, will need flexibility when transportation or childcare may take longer to return back to their previous times. And as we are joined together, we also need to think about how to be inclusive to address the issues of what's being shown on video conference. Many salons and barbershops are still closed, and there's a huge difference in what it takes to be video ready for women and people of color, some of whom may already face biases and being viewed as unprofessional compared to white men. Employees may also have children around or need to prepare lunch during a meeting. I recently watched a white male official join a public meeting late, wearing a hoodie and eating a snack, while his counterparts, who are women and people of color and LGBT individuals, were dressed in collared shirts and blouses and didn't so much have a water bottle in view of their screen. And it was very clear who was conscious about how they were appearing on video. It's an added level of stress and management throughout your day. So employers can help this by setting expectations and communicating when do videos need to be on, and allowing for videos to be off with no judgment. Employers can also create standard backgrounds as a way to level the playing field. That would work as long as everyone uses them. And visibility also goes to making sure that all voices have a chance to speak, even those who do not appear on video, giving time for and encouraging discussion and feedback, and directly inviting employees to speak. Along those lines, it's also helpful to communicate and connect, empower employees to share their experiences. There's a lot going on, but we aren't bumping into our colleagues in the hall to discuss. So employers can create an environment where employees feel comfortable sharing what's going on in their lives. Managers, too, need to be open to hearing about challenges and helping employees navigate them. And this could be in support groups at the beginning of small group meetings. For example, at the Department on the Status of Women, we start our staff meetings with a check-in on how each person is feeling, and maybe an achievement of the last week, something they want to celebrate. And then we follow it up with their updates on relevant work topics. Encouraging employees to connect with one another and open up about their experiences helps to establish trust, which is shown to reduce turnover rates and create greater engagement and innovation. High trust cultures also lead to more productive, less stressed, and more satisfied employees. If you know you can lean on your manager to understand that there's something else going on in your life at this moment, you can feel a sense of relief, and letting that go and not worrying about your job at that moment. And of course, requires some modeling, leading by example. All of this needs to be led and communicated by the top, with managers modeling behaviors, inclusive behaviors. They can monitor their own implicit biases as well and counteract these judgments. It can help to create a safe space to talk about race and biases and educate employees on how to stop using common words and phrases that reinforce stereotypes and perpetuate bias. And practicing inclusion also implies that everyone should have a voice in defining the collective environment. And this means being open to feedback and pushback and re-examining norms and practices given the current conditions, new members of a team, shifting needs and priorities. And lastly, when we think about an inclusive workplace, we also need to think about returning to the workplace and giving time to adjust back, giving time for employees to ramp up and make plans and maybe maintain some days at home for some time that can help them meet their individual needs. This leads back to the flexibility discussion. It's helpful also when you're looking for a position to hire to look to provide pathways and on-ramps for workers who may have chosen or been forced to step out of the workforce during this time. Leaving the workforce, even if it's just for a year or two, has ripple effects that can follow a woman for the rest of her life, and even depressing her earnings in retirement. Workers of color can often have smaller networks and have more difficulty getting in the door. So a diverse and inclusive hiring can be an entire webinar on its own, but I did want to mention that as you think about return and on-ramps, that this could be a piece of that. Next slide, please. As we know, women's paychecks are not optional for most families, and women of color are more likely to be the family breadwinner than white women, and yet face a larger wage gap with white men. These numbers reflect a slightly different experience in San Francisco than nationally. Here, women of color are actually much farther behind white women. Men of color also experience a wage gap, and these differences in earnings, added with higher student loan debt for women of color and less in retirement and Social Security contributions, creates over a career, creates a lifetime wealth gap. We have both gender and race factoring into the wage gap, often driven by unconscious bias. And while we have strong equal pay laws, salary history bans, and others, individuals and employers can implement additional strategies to ensure they have fair pay for all. Next slide. And the pay gap is not only determined during the hiring process and when a raise may be negotiated. A large part of how many employees increase their earnings are through raises, bonuses, and promotions. Again, the long-standing workplace gender and racial biases are magnified with the current situation. Too many people in power still believe myths like women lack ambition, they lack confidence, or they are carrying more of the load at home, so they want to opt out of big roles, and that there aren't enough women in the pipeline to increase representation in the C-suite. Or women are viewed negatively for being overly ambitious. Women might show up as overly ambitious because they consistently try to prove their value. Studies show that women are promoted on past performance and men are promoted on potential. And often women face the prove it again bias that asks women to repeatedly show that they can do what they've already done. And a recent study in performance evaluations in tech found that 66% of women's performance reviews contained a negative personality criticism, like you come off as abrasive, whereas only 1% of men's reviews did. And actually, workplaces who view themselves as being meritocratic are often, in fact, more biased than other organizations. Another survey found that Black employees were actually more ambitious than white employees, with 63% of Black women compared to 51% of white women rating themselves as aspiring to a top job. Yet about 20% feel that someone of their race and ethnicity would never achieve a top position at their companies, compared to only 3% of white professionals who feel this way. Black women are also less likely to have access to the same support and advocacy as white women. For example, 35% of white women have individuals in their networks who have advocated for their ideas and skills, compared to 19% of Black women. And when it comes time for performance reviews, sought after assignments, bonuses, and promotions, with this current environment, leadership and managers can too easily fall back on existing relationships and biases without the face-to-face time or of seeing individuals who they might not normally see in their daily experience. Next slide. So, closing these gaps. As we look to close the gaps for women and people of color, a key part of ending the pay gap is looking at the data. It's a best practice that's being more widely implemented to regularly audit not only base pay, but bonuses, and to use that data to then remedy those gaps that might be identified. And as well as using data to value the contributions of staff rather than relying on your feelings and perceptions of how they're performing. We can also, again, emphasize transparency. Another key way to close the wage gap and other gaps for women and people of color. What is it going to take to get hired, to be promoted? Don't make people guess. What's involved? How can they reach the next level? Providing salary bands so people know, even if it's for an internal promotion, so they know how much there is to work with the salary. And explicitly stating that the salary is negotiable can reduce the gender gap in applicants. So not even just what someone ends up being paid, but that women feel more likely to apply for a position knowing that the salary is negotiable. Accountability is a key part. Companies need to hold themselves accountable, and managers should be held accountable for the reasons that they're giving certain bonuses, promotions, or raises, and having data to back up their reasoning. Again, we want to see that people aren't just being elevated because they're similar to those who are in power. And at this time, it's not harmful to over communicate. This is incredibly important, especially as we think about performance reviews as we're coming to the year end. Often companies might be having a year review. Well, this is not a typical year. There were already biases in performance reviews, but employees are in a heightened state of stress with COVID, with violent racism, with caring for children at home and other loved ones, which managing fear it's a good idea to consider rethinking or pausing performance reviews and favoring regular check-ins to monitor performance at this time, or to hold performance reviews but to not tie a bonus to it, as some companies have decided to do. Again, this year, maybe there aren't bonuses. We're in a tougher financial position. So when there aren't an opportunity to reward someone or offer equal increases financially, get creative about what you can offer to employees. Things like stretch opportunities, new trainings. More than 80% of white men, but only 53% of women of color, and about 60% of white women report that they have the same access to desirable assignments as their colleagues. So it's a huge opportunity for you to check in with staff and ask them what they want to see, how they want to grow in their experiences at this time. And ultimately, we should be thinking about how we're communicating across the workplace to make sure that the communication is clear, regardless of which team someone might be in, so that the communication is not held at the top. Next slide, please. And while I do believe ultimately that workplaces should be responsible for solving workplace biases rather than forcing individuals to change themselves to have equality, until then, there are a few things that you can do individually. And I did want to share, there are 2 free resources that I have personally enjoyed. And that is, first, our friends of the Commission on the Status of Women hold free salary negotiation workshops. They were typically in person, but they do have an upcoming Zoom webinar on September 15th. They also have a self-paced course through the American Association of University Women, who are longstanding advocates, researchers, and have done a lot of work around equal pay. So that is coming up. You can go to friendscosw.org/equal pay to know more. And I also want to shout out the UC Hastings College of Law Center for Work-Life Law. It has a number of resources for interrupting bias in hiring, reviews, assignments, and meetings, which can be really helpful at this time. And that's at biasinterrupters.org. So I just want to close and say, I really, really appreciate Melinda, your introduction and your comments, the Chamber of Commerce, and especially Emma and Kim for your help in setting this up and inviting me to be a speaker today, and all of the attendees. I hope there was something interesting for you to gather from this, and I'd love to hear what strategies you're seeing in your companies that are working, some that might be off track, what questions you have that you would like to learn more about. I'm happy to go further into any of these strategies and other issues, and just what in general you wish to see as a change in the upcoming year. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry, you can go to the final slide, which is my contact information. If you don't get a chance to get your question answered today, or you think about it later, please feel free to reach out to me. And you can also find our information and resources at sfgov.org/DOSW. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was incredible, really quite substantive, and it certainly triggered some thoughts for me. I'll just kick it off by something I went through fairly recently, about 3 months ago, where I had some insensitivity at work via Zoom and by text. And it was a challenge because this was a peer, and I could have gone straight to my boss or to HR, but I decided to go straight to the individual who had made the biased, very unnecessary comments to me. And I think I would have liked to have someone like you to bounce, how should I handle this type conversation with, because I do think that is happening. People have different perceptions of people, and now, people being cooped up at home have, I don't know, there may be some empowerment to say things or to text things that they may not ordinarily do. So just wanted to get your thoughts on things like that when I can't say SHIT, but I could say when things happen at the workplace, especially in this environment, how do we deal with that?
Yeah, it really is so tough, and it's hard to know where people are coming from too. If you have written communication, understanding tone. A lot of people are using, chat features, Slack channels to communicate, and you lose a lot in that. Even if you're in a video conference, you're not getting the same visual cues about somebody's engagement, how they're feeling. You might be, distracted by your own face or whatever else might be on your screen. So it's really hard to know where people are coming from and to feel that connection. And I think definitely having somebody to bounce it off of too, to talk to someone before, am I really perceiving this as is being said? But, people who are aware that they might not be the typical type of employee, the sort of white male ideal employee, they're much more in tune to the subtle cues of belonging. And so I do say trust your gut if you feel like you are being slighted or disadvantaged or prejudiced in some way. And certainly people need to prioritize their own safety. Is it safest for you to just disconnect and put up a barrier? People need to be able to have that. Or is it safer for you to reach out to that person directly, go through a manager? It's really, it's a really hard situation. And especially you don't have witnesses in the same experience as like someone at the desk nearby who happens to hear a comment. So that is a little bit more tricky in terms of workplace bias and harassment because it is coming through different forms. I will say, we do have things written down, and so you can keep track of things if you are feeling like maybe there's something going on here that needs to escalate to your HR or to be documented to sort of build experience. It's not this is not the time to brush off comments, but it's also the time to think about what are the different avenues that would make you feel safest, most whole, and welcomed. But again, I think managers really can do a lot to create that environment where those types of comments are not tolerated, and to lead by example in investigating their own biases.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and the good moral to this story is when I confronted, which was uncomfortable, the person directly, we hammered it out, and he assured me it will never happen again. So, yeah, I mean, but it's hard. It's definitely hard. So here's another question that's come in from our audience. Given the current state with hiring freezes, furloughs, and raise freezes, what are other ways a women employee can advocate for themselves and help close the pay gap?
Yeah. Well, setting yourself up for that promotion, for that raise, for the next job where you can, a lot of times women and people of color get a raise by going to another organization and negotiating for a new salary there. If they're not getting what they're valued at their current workplace. So thinking about what do you need to get to that next level? What could you ask for in terms of new assignments, more trainings, maybe reaching out to those who are in higher positions and building that network so you have more people to advocate for you, more in your corner. Those are the types of things that people can do in the meantime when there may not be the funds available to get an instant bonus or raise and close that gap. So thinking about the longer game of what are the types of skills that would make you more valuable, or assignments that would give you the experience to prove that you are worthy of that. Of course, everyone's worthy of being paid what they're worth, but that they could document that they are in due for a raise or a promotion.
Here's another one. Without normal socialization at work and virtual happy hour burnout, although I still like doing happy hours, I'm not burned out of those yet. What are ways women can find community at the virtual workplace?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's something that for whoever might have submitted that, please think about taking it up on your own. I know we all have enough on our plates and are juggling a lot, but really just reaching out to those who you used to see, maybe in the bathroom, in the line when you were waiting, who you might not have a regular opportunity to work with, sending them a quick message to check in and see how they're doing. I do think people really do appreciate hearing from those who they haven't heard from lately. And building community, through, some people have groups through their, different means of communication, whether that's your Slack or your Teams or whatever, your Facebook, whatever people might be using to network, building those groups or group texts even, to just have that kind of regular check-in when something comes up, for example, wanting to check in about a comment someone made and how to handle that, or just seeing like, we're missing those glances across the table when someone makes a comment and you just want to say like, oh, finally, but you're not getting that that connection with folks. So really thinking about ways that you can sort of reach out and find that. But there are a lot of organizations are keeping up with their affinity groups meeting. So if that's true for your company or your employer, think about joining it if you haven't previously. Think about finding those who are like-minded or going through similar experiences and might be willing to just touch base and keep in touch.
Yeah, I think that's good. I have probably 3 or 4 groups now. Some are work-related, some are purely social, and we don't overdo it, but it's it's just good to check in. I feel connected.
Yeah. You get that text, middle of the day, and maybe you can't respond to it then, but that someone's feeling it. They've read it. They feel connected.
Yep. So in today's political climate and our new environment, how can we facilitate important discussions that promote equity? Especially now, we're 55 days away from the election. It's a lot of craziness right now. How can we just keep our issues front and center?
Yeah, I think it's really tough. You do have to be strategic about when is the moment. But there's always a moment. And whether that's, someone made a comment and during a meeting and you want to take a time to just say, hey, let's just dig into that a little bit. Invite a speaker. You can definitely have social events. People have kind of gotten the Zoom burnout. I definitely feel that. But also, think about if you want to invite a presenter to a group and host a conversation on these topics. Also, providing a space for employees of color to talk amongst themselves. What are they experiencing? So that they don't have to do the heavy burden of being there and consoling white people as we confront, what we're waking up to and coming to terms with in our experiences. So this is definitely the moment to keep those conversations going, but there is a key factor in when is it appropriate. It can be virtual, can be a great opportunity if you have a leadership who wants to convene the entire company and express what they're doing, what, beyond their statement on solidarity, what are they doing to make sure that employees of color are feeling included, and to also solicit feedback on what do employees of color need. Having surveys, there are a lot of great resources out there to check in on how employees are feeling, and I think that there's, of course, always a need to have these conversations and thinking about strategically when is that moment, if it's a separate incident or if it's something that needs to come up in the moment. That's the kind of case by case basis, but we do have to keep these conversations going.
Yeah, there was a question that came in chat about what's United Airlines doing specifically, and we are doing exactly what you said. We just last week, in fact, had our president of our company, who's African American. He led a whole company-wide discussion, and we are listening. We're putting programs in place. We just announced today that we're searching for our second African American board member. So we're making those commitments, and I think it does have to be institutional, and leadership needs to come from the top. So it's not just lip service, and that's what I think some organizations and companies are struggling with. Some have, they made their statement once when everything brewed up after George Floyd's murder, and then since then have been quiet. So I think to get that as part of the culture, the DNA of the culture of the company really robust. I think that is important, and people like you and I need to keep pushing on that.
Keep beating the drum. And that brings up another point about when you think about the C-suite, D&I is often segregated into HR. They're in their own silo. Bringing that conversation to the full C-suite, having those around the boardroom, those conversations, and incorporating it into ongoing metrics, measuring. It should be something that companies, if they have the resources and the capabilities, should be checking in with their employees on regularly. How included are they feeling, so that they have that information and they're not waiting to hear whispers or grievances bubbling up outside.
Yep. So there's a resource gap between small and large businesses. How can smaller businesses support equity training?
Yeah, well, there are some great free resources. As I mentioned, the UC Hastings bias interrupters are free. They have worksheets and toolkits. There are some other folks that have resources, and you can find some of them at our website, especially around equal pay. And there are, of course, resource gaps, but when you have a smaller organization, sometimes you can also be a little bit more aware of what's happening. And you'd be a little bit more in tune to whether there might be pay gaps if you just take a quick look at what's happening across a position or a level, and see that. So I do understand, there's not an entire team of folks dedicated to these issues within some smaller companies and employers, but there are a lot of resources out there. I will also say, in terms of addressing mothers and families' needs in the workplace, Healthy Families Workplace, which we've been a member of for a long time, also offers toolkits, and I believe that's healthyfamilies.org, healthyfamiliesworkplace.org. But we're a coalition of organizations and employers who are coming up with ways to support parental leave, flexibility, family flexibility, lactation accommodations, and others that are much more at this time, really relevant in this moment. So there are lots of free resources out there, and please feel free to send me an email too, and I can help direct you to some.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, and then we're going to call it a wrap. So for both speakers, have you experienced imposter syndrome on any level, and how do you overcome this? Why don't you go first, Elizabeth, and I'll
Oh, who doesn't? Who doesn't?
Yeah.
I would love to be one of those people who never experiences that. Of course, it's great to have the confidence, and to try to just push through, fake it till you make it kind of approach. But I also think for a lot of us, there's a need to just acknowledge that imposter syndrome is real, that stereotype threats and the biases that are against women and people of color, those are real too. And so it's a delicate balance to acknowledge how you might be judged differently based on who you are, but also to understand that maybe you are your own harshest critic. So it's I find it an ongoing situation, and I always rely on friends and colleagues to help me feel like I have a place at the table. How about you, Melinda? What have you done in your career?
I would say it's similar to some of the comments you made, that people like you and I can't afford to be average, and I stole that from my husband. But it's true. We can't be average. We have to be prepared and over prepared as we go into the day and know our stuff. We need to be able to be articulate and express our opinions and our attitudes, and not hold back, and just be measured about it, because you don't want to be deemed over ambitious. You want to be ambitious but not over ambitious. And you need to earn your place at the table. So you can't rely on others cutting you a break necessarily, but know, as you said, that you're going to be judged differently. So just don't give anyone any reason to doubt your competency and worthiness. So
Yeah.
that's what I'll say on that. And then last question, do we have an SF version of the 21-day challenge that we could all dive into and have some shared language and understanding? And over to you.
Wow, I am not aware of anything out there, but let's create it. Let's do it. There's lots of things we're diving into, and I will also shout out Assessor Carmen Chu, who's a leader of the Economic Recovery Task Force with your president of the chamber, and her work around that we're working on around leading up to highlighting women's leadership through the W Challenge. So you all can find hashtag W Challenge or go to wchallenge.org and see some of the actions that are happening there to gear up for Election Day. But I think overall, there are so many more things we can do. In August, it was just Black Business Owner Month and a month of actions for the Black community. I mean, it's great to have challenges and moments of trying to galvanize action, but we should always be thinking about how we can keep it going and ongoing action to create a better and more just and equitable society and community should never stop. So I welcome you to create it and bring it, though. Would love to join.
That can be our deliverable from today's discussion. So I want to thank Rodney Fong, our CEO of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, Kim Mercado, who heads all our marketing and events and programming, Emma Simons, who is a senior advisor on our team, marketing team. You all have pulled together an outstanding day today, and thank you so much. And to Accenture, again, our heartfelt thanks for your sponsorship, and to all of our sponsors today. We really appreciate all of you, and we look forward to our upcoming event. So let me give you a little teaser on that before we wrap here. Okay, so you need to register. It's the 3rd annual Well Conference on October 2nd. We have a great lineup of speakers, including the only female chef in America to have 3 Michelin stars. That's amazing. Dominique Crean, and founder of Imprint City, Tyra Fennell. We also have another Well webinar on October 8th as we discover 10 strategies for women to succeed and lead in business. Great topic. Make sure to visit sfchamber.com to learn more about upcoming events. We have a lot going on right now, and we're going to make it to the fall and really enlighten you and go into next year stronger than ever. So thank you again for joining us and supporting one another. Thank you so much, and we'll call it a wrap. Bye-bye. Thanks, Elizabeth. See you soon.